Good afternoon. Welcome to this UpSkill Works Forum where we bring you interviews with business and community leaders, policymakers, and leading thinkers on the key workforce issues confronting our region. I'm Peter Beard, and I lead the Greater Houston Partnership's UpSkill Houston initiative that partners with employers, educational leadership, and community-based organizations to strengthen the talent pipeline here in the Houston region. And it's really focused on what employers need and how do we help Houstonians connect to good jobs that increase economic mobility and prosperity. Before we get to our guests, I want to review a couple housekeeping details. The Greater Houston Partnership is a trusted source for information related to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to highlight a specific resource as you each consider how to reopen your workplaces safely. The partnership is providing guidance to ensure companies and organizations can safely reopen, or as we say, work safe. Specifically, the partnership has developed 15 Work Safe 2.0 principles to provide guidance to companies and organizations as they plan their reopening and/or expand their operations while also protecting the health of their employees, their customers, and the public at large. We have also curated industry best practices, trade association guidance to help businesses develop sector-specific plans to minimize the risk of transmission of COVID-19 in the workplace. The guidance can be found listed by sector on the partnership's updated WorkSafe page. And at the conclusion of this webinar, we will highlight where those materials can be found. All attendees are muted and your videos turned off for the entirety of the webinar. Chat should not be used for questions and answers. Chat will not be moderated for the questions. Please use the chat function to connect with our production team if you're having any issues. If you have questions for our guests or me, you should direct them to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Q&A will be moderated. Today, we're fortunate to have three people to address today's topic of understanding skills in the changing nature of work. Mandy Williams, who is the managing partner and also known as Black of RED+BLACK. Dr. Fred Oswald, who is a professor at Rice University School of Social Science and serves as the Herbert S. Autry Chair in Social Sciences and Director of Graduate Studies. And Greg Hambrick, who is the co-founder and CEO of Fast Forward Works. Welcome, Mandy, Fred, and Greg. And in preparing our conversation for today, it seemed to me that we would want to cover several broad topics, help our audience understand the importance of soft skills and cognitive skills for success in the workplace, and then trying to understand what's the difference between soft and cognitive skills, what skills are critical for employers when they're hiring, what role do these skills play in helping individuals see career adjacencies that provide the opportunity for new career opportunities with better prospects for future growth and improved income. And then how do factors such as automation, workplace diversity, and the current pandemic impact the importance of soft and cognitive skills for employers and for workers? We'll go deeper into these topics, but is there anything else we should add?
This sounds great. If we address these at all, we will be in great shape.
Thanks, Fred. And for our audience, as I noted previously, we will respond to some of the questions viewers submit via the Q&A function or submitted in advance. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. And as our audience may know, we will probably not get to all of the questions, but we'll follow up this webinar with an executive summary of the discussion. So let's get started. This first question is for the three of you and is intended to help the audience understand soft and cognitive skills. What are the soft and cognitive skills, and what's the difference between the two of them?
So these are pretty broad labels and kind of divide a vast world of ways to describe characteristics of people, right? So you might have heard of soft skills being called 21st century skills or socio-emotional skills. There are a lot of other terms, but you really have to dig in to define that in any reasonably precise way, well beyond that. So to think about things like empathy and negotiation and teamwork, time management, these are the sorts of things that compose soft skills and are more generic in nature. I know we'll get into these later. Cognitive skills, I'll turn that over to Greg to discuss some of his efforts in the cognitive domain.
Yeah, so thank you, Fred. Yeah, we look at cognitive skills in a couple of different ways. We look at some that are more innate or hardwired in people, and some that can be learned. They differ from soft skills in that they are much more specific. They might measure or be attributed to things like how good your memory is, which is a fairly, fixed cognitive skill. But it plays into some of your softer skills and some of your other abilities. But we tend to look at those cognitive skills more as dividing them into two groups. They are things you're capable of doing, the way you think, the way your mind works. Some are innate and some can be learned and improved upon.
Okay, and so I struggled with actually trying to figure out what the difference was, because I don't have a science or technology background, and how I look at them is I look at cognitive skills in the context of, to me it's how we learn or how we remember or how we think through things, and then soft skills are more how we work both on our own and with others. And I see that the soft skills are what help you to get the most out of your cognitive and technical skills. So that's my non-scientific way of looking at this.
I violently agree with you, Mandy. I think that's a great way to put it, that soft skills really give you the capabilities, the energy to exercise your cognitive skills. So when Greg talks about memory, my memory personally is not perfect, but that doesn't mean, you can learn regardless of what your differences are, right? Everybody can learn. Everybody has their profile of strengths and areas of development, and everybody is complementary and different. And so we all work together to make ourselves better. And we're dividing the world right now in with this initial question, and pretty broadly, but we'll get into some more specifics.
Well, and we also believe too that that your cognitive skills are not necessarily, they do have some limitations, but awareness of what those skills are. And in this day and age, just the having access to other forms of technology that can kind of augment our shortcomings can really result in sort of an optimized person, and to be able to, optimally perform and be able to achieve, greater heights, if you will.
And wouldn't you say, Greg, that part of the cognitive skills, and I think this is where you were going, is they're somewhat developed unconsciously over a period of time in your life, and you can always access them at some level. Whereas soft skills are things that can actually be consciously developed as well.
Right, I think that's right. Fred knows more about this because I'm not a psychologist, but Fred knows more about the developmental of the development of the brain. But if you would think,
no pressure here.
No pressure. But we look at a lot of these cognitive skills as they're formulated, say before someone is 13 years old, right? And you make improvements on those over time. But they are, to a certain extent, they are the building blocks, right? And they're fixed in nature in some ways. And then these soft skills are, they are a function to a certain extent of those cognitive skills, but they are experiential in nature too. Like your experience in your family, your experience in school, things that you've been exposed to or not. But they are more dynamic in nature than let's just say, specifically, back to memory, since it's a very easy cognitive skill for all of us to focus on. That becomes fairly fixed, if you will, at a certain developmental part of being a human being. But then you do call on that obviously every day and in many, many things that you do, but it is more fixed as opposed to getting along with others, right? Which is, it is experiential, and you can learn these things from experience and in your life, not just your working life.
Did you want to add anything, Fred, before we kind of transition to some work that Mandy's been doing?
I'll just say really briefly, I mean, these are very broad issues that I guess as a professor I can go on at length about, but you know, really there's, you don't have to be a scientist to know that we explore our opportunities and see what's new out there, and also look at our strengths and capitalize on them. And we do that through both formal and informal experiences, right? Some things we pick up, we role model, we see other people do things and learn from that, and then we do things ourselves. So there's a lot of exploring, you know, whether you're a job seeker and you're trying to round out your profile of strengths, or whether you're an employer and trying to figure out the profiles that you need for your current work or the future of work as you anticipate changes. It's very challenging, but you know, we all work together to figure out a framework where we can have data inform that in the service of what we want ultimately, which is gainful and meaningful employment and you know, partnerships between the employee and employers.
Thanks. So Mandy, recently UpSkill Houston and RED+BLACK partnered to develop a new video series of short video animations, and I think they're really good. That's a personal opinion. But they're focused on soft skills, and they really came out of kind of the work that you've been doing for years. We now have them available on upskillmylife.org. For as long as we've known each other, you've been a champion for helping young people and your sister, the mere mortal mom, to understand these soft skills. Name 2 or 3 that you believe are important to employers in today's world. Why are they important, and how can individuals develop or strengthen these skills as they consider new career opportunities?
Okay, so first I want to say life never goes as planned. So recognizing that and learning to roll with it is a great skill set. My sister's husband got fired, and I turned her crisis into a book, A Brand of Business. It was supposed to be the basis of a sitcom, and we ended up detouring into the world of education. Early in my sister's crisis, she lamented over the fact that she was just a mom, and she, you know, was like, you're this corporate executive. And so she was turning to me, and I pointed out to her that she possessed many of these critical soft skills that I had looked for in the corporate world. I mean, problem solving, creative thinking, teamwork. And at that point, I realized that many people, including parents and educators, are just not familiar with the concept of soft skills. And when I thought more about it, I realized in the corporate world, so often we hired for technical skills, but then we'd fire people for lack of soft skills. And so these skills, I realized, are totally transferable from our personal lives to the workplace and across all industries, but yet you have the perfect opportunity to kind of practice them in your personal life. And I don't think we take advantage of that because a lot of people don't realize these skills are so valuable. In terms of what skills would be on the top of my list, I think number 1 would be communication skills. It impacts everything we do every day. And then the other one is probably not that might come to other people's minds, and that's the growth mindset. And you were talking to this earlier that, I mean, there's certain skills and talents that we may have, but through hard work and focused efforts in self-development, we can develop so many other skills, but it's a mindset of believing that there's growth opportunities within yourself. And I think I answered all your questions and threw in a little flavor to it too, I hope.
I think the other thing that you've done is you've partnered with your sister and worked with, you know, students across Houston is beginning to put descriptions to it. Like you just practiced negotiating skills. So you gave it a term so that people understood what skill they actually had.
I mean, I ask people this all the time. Anybody who's either been a teacher or has children, do they have negotiating skills? And I mean, people are like, oh my gosh, yes, you know. And so, but they don't know they're called negotiating skills. And so if we don't start labeling them, I mean, I hate to say labeling things, but identifying what these skills are, nobody's going to realize they have it. Now, what we're also hearing from educators that are using some of our resources is they're saying students that are not the straight A students. Now, my sister was the straight A student, but they're pointing out ones who may not have done well in tests and kind of question their abilities, when they start realizing they have very strong soft skills, it changes how they see themselves. And so the teachers are saying they're seeing, direct, value and change of attitude when they go, oh, wait, yeah, I'm a team player, or I've got leadership skills, or I think creatively. The fact I didn't get straight A's on math tests doesn't mean I don't have value in the workplace. Yeah. And so we're seeing huge feedback and implications of this.
Greg, do you have any insights or reactions you'd like to add?
I do, Peter. Just to tag on to what Mandy just said, we have spent a lot of our time working with marginalized populations. So we've worked with high school students who come from some of the more impoverished areas of Houston. And to Mandy's point, a lot of these students are not particularly scholarly. They're not high achievers, but we assess them and we pick out pockets of their abilities where they really do excel. And the knowledge of that, the self-awareness of that, makes all the difference in the world in their outlook, because it provides some hope in terms of their self-efficacy, their belief that they can actually succeed, that they possess enough talent in order to make it in the world. And many times, the yardstick really is it's grades, it's SAT scores, it's standardized things like that they do not necessarily do well in, but it doesn't mean that they don't have talent. And so when you can show somebody that in an objective way, it makes a huge difference in their outlook, and I think raises the ceiling on what they're able to accomplish.
And before I turn to Fred, I want to remind the audience that as questions come up that they want to ask you all or me, please use the Q&A function, and we'll be getting to that shortly. Fred, I know you recently were a co-editor of a book called Workforce Readiness and the Future of Work that looks at the efforts required to ensure reliable and strong talent and skill in the U.S. workforce. And I know you also study the role cognitive skills can play in training readiness and adaptability. So given the current environment, what are the cognitive skills that you believe are important in today's organizational and business setting?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, we have a co-edited book that just came out on called Workforce Readiness and the Future of Work. And we were fortunate, my co-editors, Tara Barrett and Lori Foster, to assemble a full complement of authors across different disciplines. So think economics, computer science, counseling psychology, and policy. And so people from very different perspectives addressing the workforce issue, meaning that it's being addressed at multiple levels. So not just the student and job seeker levels, which are obviously very valuable as we've been discussing, but also the employer perspective. Sometimes there is a reliance on grades. Grades are important to reflect knowledge, but knowledge is obviously not the only component of a good employee, as we've been discussing at length here. And, it really serves a diversity mission. Sometimes people don't connect the two, but to select in a diverse manner is to get a diverse workforce, right? It's not just demographics. Demographics is more the product of selecting on diverse characteristics as you engage in looking for the pockets of soft skills that are necessary to function in today's jobs. So this book really brought together those multiple perspectives from education and employment, technology and policy, and thought about this multi-level issue of, again, organizations have their own purposes, but then there are policies addressing both education and the workforce. And then, of course, there are futurists that we all see in the news that are speaking about trying to make forecasts, interesting forecasts, and sometimes true ones about what the future will be like. And, we listen to them because, if you're trying to get at your own training, answering your question about cognitive skills, there's the idea of exploring versus exploiting in a sense. So exploring means trying to figure out the technical training you might want, right? Trying out different experiences, looking at what a welding job looks like, for example, by going out in the field and shadowing somebody, or trying out different college majors in the university environment. That's exploring, and I can, we all can speak from personal experience that exploring is valuable. It seems random, but luck favors the well-prepared, and if you go into planful environments, or supportive environments, you can sort of run into those lucky situations more often. So exploring is important, and you pick up knowledge that way that's very valuable. Exploiting is the more formal and sometimes more narrow opportunities that get you the job that you seek right away. So there are, as we know, technical training. Our book has a chapter on apprenticeships and how important a pathway that is toward personal economic success and cumulatively success for organizations and national productivity. But that's an exploiting notion, meaning it's narrow. And as soon as automation, we talked about automation in the intro here. As soon as automation finds inroads in various ways, that can displace jobs. Some of the futurists say that. Sometimes they say, and I tend to lean more toward, of course it depends on the job, that automation can be a supplement. So what will your skill set need to be as you work with automation, right? A team becomes a different team. You become a different worker as these intelligent agents enter into your workforce, your workspace in different ways. So, the way you gain those skills is changing. I think my advice, the devil's in the details here, but whether you're an employer or a job seeker, I think a little knowledge goes a long way. In other words, if you think a little bit harder about what your job is as an employer, maybe you'll hire for employees a little bit differently. And if you're a job seeker, if you reach out a little bit more in terms of how to translate your skills, even a little bit, don't take it as a daunting task, you'll be a lot better out there. One last thing is Mandy's comments reminded me of military. So when you're in the military and transitioning to civilian life, there is this transition issue where all these soft skills are gained in terms of self-discipline, leadership, teamwork, communication, empathy, and a lot of time management. A lot of these skills don't get translated very, I won't say they don't get translated successfully, but sometimes that translation is not as immediate as we might like to get folks into the workforce. So I'll leave it at that.
So Fred, as you think about it, how do we help people identify these skills and further develop them? I mean, you just kind of began to get at it in terms of that.
Yeah, so I am my training is in developing measures, basically. Have tests will travel, and I develop various types of tests that are used in college admissions, in K-12, but also actually mainly, I should have let off with this perhaps, in organizations when they're hiring. And often when I'm asked to be involved in these kinds of efforts, of course I'm interested, ask questions that are a little bit outside my interest to make sure that's what they want. So in other words, I'll ask, are you sure this is a hiring issue? Are you sure you need to test and select people, or is it a training issue? And that opens up the conversation a bit. And sometimes they might be testing, for example, for job knowledge, but you end up with a conversation about soft skills, and you hear from employers about what they need. And one way to understand what soft skills are needed in those conversations. So to answer your question, identification can really happen in these, it depends on the context moments, right? And with an employer, I might ask, well, what are the issues you've had when you've had to deal with problems within your workforce, or you had to transfer or terminate an employee? Those aren't the only times soft skills are necessary, but they definitely prompt things in the employer's mind if it's framed that way. They can say, oh, I terminated an employee because they could not negotiate for what they wanted, essentially, right? They get into arguments and don't take deep breaths as often as they might like. So a lot of issues can come up that way, but there are many others, obviously, to bring up soft skills. And as we've said, soft skills are generic. They might vary in how much you need them. You know, how much time management do you need when in a job that's always scheduled for you? It might be less than usual. But on the other hand, if your job, if COVID-19, for instance, has you working at home and off of a regular schedule, perhaps you need to have more of those time management skills than you ever had before. And so soft skills can wax and wane in their importance within a job, and they're certainly different across jobs.
Mandy, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think sometimes sitting from the employer side, and I saw this countless times, we were so focused on defining the technical needs of the job that we didn't focus on what else we needed. And if we'd stop and think about who we ended up letting go because of what soft skills they were missing, I think we would have done a better job of defining the job. And I think the other thing is sometimes when and this goes to how you interview people, is to ask leading questions and give them the opportunity. I'm thinking specifically in terms of the military, where an employer who's interviewing you may not think about some of the skills that the individual from the military, knows is critical to getting a project done. If they know, okay, point it out, explain what you mean by it, you'll understand. First of all, you're showing great communication skills and critical thinking as well as other things, but it's a two-way street. It's not just the employer saying, I need this. It's also the potential employee saying, these are skills I'm bringing to the table, and this is why I think they're valuable.
So before we kind of move to the next section, there's some questions I want from the audience that I want us to get to. One is, and two are related. So one is, what are the ways to express these soft skills in a resume to reflect that what the applicant is capable of? And then another one really was focused on, could you please share some insights on how to help individuals translate their life experiences into soft skills?
Can I plug one of the videos right now, the resume writing video? Years ago, my first job, I'd come out of business school. I had, the education credentials, but I had no real valuable work experience. And so I realized my resume was going to be marketing me. I looked at it as a marketing piece. And so right top, first thing you saw after my name were the skills I thought I had, whether it be organization skills, time management, the skills that I could prove I had based on things I did in the education, getting my education. And I was so successful with that format of a resume that we all do. If a resume is successful, you just kind of update it and move on. And that is always what I did. I put first and foremost my skill sets, and then got into what my jobs were, and over time they became more and more responsibility. So it goes back to recognizing what the skills are, and then being able to, if in an interview somebody goes, okay, you say you've got great leadership skills, what makes you think that? To be able to back it up with examples.
So Greg and Mandy, I know both of you have done very specific work with disadvantaged populations. Mandy, I know you've been in the prison system. Greg, I know you've worked with homeless individuals. I'm not sure if you've worked with folks in the prison system or not, but
we are now.
There's a question in here is how do we help develop the soft skills and people coming out of that system, recognizing we have a lot of folks ending up in our region that are formerly incarcerated as well as homeless, and how do we help them in that space related to skills?
Yeah, if I could take a stab at that, Peter, I would say, because we're testing inmates now in Huntsville, and I have a big bias towards, again, awareness and of skill, awareness of what tools whether they're soft skills or hard skills, cognitive, are in your toolbox, that language. And to be able to make anyone aware of what they naturally possess or what they possess in current time, it creates an opportunity for them to build upon that and to relate those skills to specific opportunities that are in the marketplace. I think one of the ways we do that, and what we're trying to do in Huntsville, is to try to experiment with how best to communicate the results of assessments that basically do objectively measure these things that we're talking about, so that a person upon re-entry into society has a really good self-awareness. And to Mandy's point about her resume, this is what I bring to the table, right? And to possess the confidence about themselves that will allow them to, to achieve.
One thing I would add to this is that if we're talking about job seeking and hiring, that is a point of negotiation is when when people are applying for jobs, when employers are hiring, right? In the sense that it's not always the case that employers need to have the perfect job applicant, right? In some kind of weird ideal sense they have in their mind. Instead, it might be that, employers talk about fit of someone they're hiring, and there's some intuitive sense of that. There might even be some specifics behind that. But I think what the spirit of fit is often this point that there's sort of it's sort of a negotiation where if we bring you into the organization with your profile of soft skills and knowledge, et cetera, are you going to fit in the sense of are you going to keep walking along the bridge to your opportunities offered on the job, right? So for example, you come in with some knowledge, you're going to get some training, right? And you're going to move forward in your job, and you might even have a career path there, right? And the more the employer helps, I'm sure there are people in the audience who know this better than me, that you get more commitment, less turnover, more teamwork, because there's this negotiation, there's this, I'm going to help you and you're going to help me kind of idea here. That's knowledge, but we could talk about any other soft skill being you're looking for it in terms of selection, but you can also develop it and help express it to the organization's benefit. So we all know we've been on teams where a team member is particularly destructive, and they actually impair the soft skills of other people in a sense. And conversely, we know great managers and great team members that help build the soft skills that you have and bring you down this bridge even further, so that when you stay in the organization or go to a new one, you can now, you have bigger muscles in terms of your soft skills. As far as communicating that to an employer, I like Mandy's point about really put it front and center that these skills cut across all jobs, and they often get ignored as we describe our own technical skills because, hey, they don't seem as unique or make you right. But they are so important. So I like the front and center aspect of that because we tend not to put it there. And the employers themselves, we've all seen job descriptions. They're often very technical and miss out on that. And the hope is you pick it up in an interview, but when interviews aren't structured, that would be another piece of advice, is to try and give similar questions to job applicants to try and get everybody the opportunity to express the soft skills they have.
So Greg, let's go back to kind of what you were getting at and kind of transition to the next piece, because really you began to describe what Fast Forward Works is really all about, which is helping candidates find and attain jobs that are matched to their individual skill sets, to your point, their toolbox, and helping employers identify those candidates that will perform well in their jobs. It seems to me that we have two issues that we could discuss here. First, how can we help people identify those skills and help match them to what would be good jobs for those skills? And I know you've done some work in this space.
Yeah, I think Peter, that the earlier we can do this and make people aware, we'll say students, let's say, because this whole process, obviously, of career identification starts fairly early in life. But the earlier we can measure these things and make students aware of them, the better. They can know, again, as they progress, what their deficiencies are, what their strengths are. These things, you know, Fred's an expert at this. The Department of Labor has the ONET database that a lot of people use, but they don't really have complete information. But our view is that if we can objectively measure these components, if you will, of what's in the toolbox, there's lots of information, lots of research on specific attributes of jobs that are necessary as building blocks to be able to successfully do that job. And so our view is that if we can do this in school, for instance, and do this with a ninth grader or maybe an eighth grader now, before the eighth grader has to decide what curriculum they will choose in the state of Texas over their high school career, if they're aware of some of their strengths, where they excel, if nothing else, they'll have a sense of how challenging or how easy it may be to succeed in that curriculum, which will again go a long ways towards them being able to identify and execute in obtaining the right job. So I think the earlier, the better.
And I know you've also done some work with employers where you've done almost, in essence, looking at the skill base of various parts of their employee base to then say, these folks have similar skill sets and we could upskill them. And so there's a job adjacency that gives them growth opportunities. That seems like what you're describing gives employers a tool also to help with how they think about growing and retaining their population, their workforce.
Right. We've done some studies inside of companies that are multi-layered, right? Who have entry-level jobs, and then there's a progression into a hierarchy. And so we have tested all the jobs along the hierarchy, and then looked at what are those skills that they all have in common, how do they differ, so that if an employer wants to make a decision on an entry-level a candidate, if you will, to fill a job, they have a sense on day one, maybe how far up the hierarchy that individual might be able to progress, and then and look at how they can be upskilled along the way. You know, like day one, they may be at level 2, but with some intervention and some coursework, some training, they may be able to upskill their toolbox, if you will, and advance all the way through the hierarchy, because in part they have the soft skills that company is looking for, so they fit in, you know, with the company culture.
Oh, I'm sorry. It seems like there's a clearinghouse opportunity in this space where we could help individuals see and employers see, here's a better way to, reduce the friction between getting a good candidate into a role.
Yeah, I think there really is. And I think if you'd like for me to talk about the clearinghouse concept, I'm happy to do that. But again, I think that we can all agree, that they're dependent upon the company, the type of job, the industry. There are a basic set of skills. We can call them soft skills that are like prerequisites to be able to, perform in that industry or in that job. I'll give you an example of a soft skill. We talk about conflict resolution, right? So we all possess these natural ways that we, resolve conflict. One of the ways is we can be accommodative, right? And so we found through our research that restaurant workers, almost an overwhelming percentage of restaurant workers, frontline public-facing restaurant workers, have an accommodative conflict resolution style, because that means the customer's always right. So if I have a glass of water and it's half full, and I ask the busboy to fill my water glass up, I don't want to question like, hey, I don't need to do that because you still have water in your glass. I want someone who's just going to fill it up because that's what I'm there for. And so if we can establish some standards like that for, say, public facing restaurant workers, and say that they pretty much by and large need to have this type of conflict resolution style, then we can start to standards, create some standards that would lend themselves to a clearinghouse, which would be a way to, in a more efficient, expansive way, match up people like this who are interested in restaurant jobs with, say, restaurant owners who are looking to, to hire people to do these public-facing jobs.
I'm not looking to take us into a total tangent, but speaking about, the students who are not the straight A test taking students, I mean, I could see having some type clearinghouse and way for those students as well as their guidance counselors to understand what their strong suits are and what they bring to the table and what their potential career paths are. Because I think sometimes those students who are not, on the academic track kind of just get pushed aside, and that it's huge waste of talent just that doesn't fit in, this cookie cutter definition of what a good student is. My sister and I are the perfect example. I mean, I know it'll be hard to imagine. I was a troublemaker. I mean, I didn't get the good grades. My sister got the straight A's, but, who was better prepared to take care of life? And so I think we've got a lot of students there that would benefit greatly from this kind of work.
Greg, any comments?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the tragedies of the way we go about filling jobs, the way we get prepared for work is that much of our natural talent, it is hidden because we, as employers, we create unwittingly, I think, a set of criteria that are really not what we're looking for. We're just looking to screen people out. And in the process, we end up screening out some really, really good candidates because we don't know enough about them. We just know what their credentials are, but we really don't know about them. And so our mission, if you will, at Fast Forward is, again, to create this efficient mechanism. It's digital to be able, and I'm not trying to create an infomercial here for Fast Forward, but to create a vehicle so that people can be better known to the market and these intangible things that are critically important to success be pointed out in a way that we've established some common language, some common terminology so that both sides of this equation can really communicate with each other. And we're able to find value in what I would call the least of us, right? Because I've seen it. We have tons and tons of data that indicate this group that some people would say belongs on the scrap heap, if you will, for lack of a better word, really and truly do possess a lot of talent that people just don't know about. So that's sort of my mission, if you will, to try to be able to bring that to bear in the market.
Fred, any final comments? And we'll get to the final question, which is related to automation and what's happening in our economy.
Okay. So I'll speak to the clearinghouse issue in a couple different ways. So in one way, I think, a clearinghouse that has a focus on soft skills, I think should have appeal to people like those who are attending this webinar, who want their unfair share of talent as they compete with others in the marketplace, right? In a sense, right? You want a better share of talent than your competitors, and the fact you're focusing that you're here on and are interested in soft skills means that you want to draw out the capabilities that people have in terms of soft skills that often go unrecognized in formal education, but also draw out the soft skills in people that may have the potential, but they need your company in order to gain those talents and function effectively. You're going to make some of the magic just as much as they are, in other words. And so the clearinghouse can really, everyone is on a similar page, and you're competing with people outside the clearinghouse. And, even within the clearinghouse, you're going to have your own way of selecting and training employees, your pool of, that leads to the second point, that your pool of talent is more diverse. And so if you have a commitment to diversity, it's one thing to do it within your organization, and that's certainly important. It's another thing to do it within a clearinghouse to say, look, this is attracting major diversity that you could not have done on your own. You're getting talent that wouldn't come to your door necessarily. In other words, your process, it sort of evens out potentially some of the bumps if you can get people sharing the enthusiasm and the data to some extent around that idea. I think it's great. I'd love to talk about that more.
So as we get to the final sets of getting to the Q&A, one final question, and to keep it short, really is how is the importance of soft skills and cognitive skills affected by kind of the 3 or 4 major forces that are hitting our economy right now? There's obviously the pandemic, we have automation and digital disruption occurring, and then this whole idea of how do we have a much more inclusive workforce. Those seem to be 3 major forces that employers are going to have to confront going forward. So quick answers, and then we'll get to Q&A from the audience. Mandy?
When I was working, and you, I believe, use this actual phrase, Fred, referring to some of these soft skills as 21st century skills. And I had to laugh because I'm old enough, I used them in the last century. And I guess that they're going to be useful in the next century. Because it doesn't matter, all the items you listed, Peter, they're all going to increase the demand for and value of soft skills, because you're always going to need individuals with the ability to adapt to change and manage the human side of work. And so I think the soft skills are going to remain critical and maybe even become even more so.
I'll add to that briefly and just say that I think we'll find that soft skills become even more important in this era of automation. When automation takes away some of the cognitive load that that are put on us for, let's say, I don't know, neurosurgery, right? Let's say we have AI involved in surgery. Well, then what can the surgeon do then but have more of the non-cognitive, have more of the ability, more of the time to be involved in the teamwork, the bedside manner, all the things that are required to keep the operations going that are less technical. Maybe that wasn't the best example, but that would be one end. Another end is turns out, go to Taco Bell. And at Taco Bell, you use a kiosk to pay. And what does that do? It frees up time for the person at the counter to help me, to look me in the eye, to see if I need anything. That more soft skills are at play. So I think the human, maybe somewhat ironically, becomes more important in the workforce rather than less as AI takes place. Now when cars took the place of horses, people worried about people losing jobs. There are some futurists that have a similar idea around AI, that while some jobs will be replaced, the balloon of human jobs for us will keep expanding. And I guess we'll see. But I would hazard to guess that soft skills will be an even more valuable commodity. And as Mandy said, it's always been valuable to some extent.
I would totally concur with all that, and I would just add that I think rather than looking at this as a doomsday kind of a event with automation and change, I think it's a great opportunity again for these populations that have been looked past because they do have great soft skills, but we don't have an effective way to measure those, and so they're not known for those. So I agree. I think the demand for human to human skill is not going to go away. I think it may increase. And we have a lot of people out there that I think would fit really well in these new jobs of the future because they do have those natural human skills that we're all going to need.
So thank you. Now we're going to turn to some questions from the audience. There's been a theme related to how do we document the skills, but then there's this counterbalance of employers do online job postings and online job applications where the postings don't necessarily ask for soft skills, and how do you get them in there? So one is how do you document them, and then how do you get past the screen? And it may be a broader conversation of we've got to get employers thinking about a much more skills-based economy than a credential-based economy.
If I can take the first shot at that, Peter, one of the analogies I like to use for these types of opportunities is the NFL Combine that the National Football League uses to bring prospects in, and they actually measure them. How fast can they run the 40-yard dash? How high can they jump? And this type of thing. And everyone sort of through that combine has the same information about these players. And during that process, people, candidates they might say, hey, you're not fast enough to be a wide receiver, but you jump high enough to be a tight end. And so there's a standard there. And so I think when it comes to this online digital way of trying to determining these things, making these decisions, again, I think it's going to be about some standard way that we can all agree. Like for soft skills, I think there is a way that we can measure people and agree upon the standard of that and be able to somehow digitize that so that these forums that we use, these platforms can still be used efficiently, but we've just added some information to them that we all agree upon that's valid. So that would be one thing I think we could do.
I think it's an education process as well for the employer to understand. I think sometimes they look at the checklist and those things you can measure, and they look for the best person that has the most of the things that they're used to measuring. And they don't realize there's this whole big, pool of talent and skills they need that are not as easily measured. But there are ways, to determine who's got what skills. It's just not necessarily what they're used to looking at. So I think a lot of the work that the two of you are doing, will help in that area, because there are ways to measure, because people want to be able to measure.
And Fred, there are a couple questions related to assessments or other tools that can help in this space, as well as given the current economic environment and the number of unemployed people who have good work experience. What are the tools available for them to help assess their skills? So there's kind of this question of what are the assessments out there that would help folks in this space?
Yeah, so there's a whole welter of assessments out there, right? Just a gigantic test vendor space out there. And as an organizational psychologist, I have this interesting position where I do research and I think about the theories or ideas driving it. That's sort of more the ivory tower side. And then I'm out there, working with organizations in the HR sphere, trying to figure out how these processes actually work, right? And that's certainly less about theory, and it's more about how are these tests going to translate into decisions that matter for the organization. And because I'm in those two camps, I can look at reports that give you red, yellow, and green flags for making hiring decisions. And I can think about these terms that Greg brought up about having reliable and valid measures and say, well, just because it says green, does it really mean I should hire them? Or just because it says red, are they really that bad? How would I know? The report looks good and I can get through my day as an HR person and just follow what it says, right? Red, yellow, green, I'm done for the day. And that's kind of the benefit that a vendor is trying to sell at some level, and that's certainly understandable. I'm a little reluctant to name specific vendors. I'm happy to have conversations around specific jobs and so on, but I would encourage people to, there's some specific sources you could go to if you're interested in assessments to get general but very useful information. One would be SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. They have a lot of well-considered white papers around assessment that would help to answer that question. The Office of Personnel Management, actually in the government, has some great information. There are standards put out by the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology that were recently updated. I was a member of that group. I guess it came out last year. And all these skills that we're talking about, as Mandy said, they're measurable. It's not a perfect science. we don't pretend it's a perfect science, but it is a science. There is a systematic approach, and you are it's probabilistic. You're trying to increase the probability of having whatever you want, a better employee on the aspects of less turnover, more engagement, more teamwork, better time management, etc. And so tests do help. There, of course, there's the other side of what is the employer offering in terms of developing the soft skills in the employees that you selected. I mean, ostensibly, a manager is supposed to, an effective manager actually improves the soft skills of employees, right? That's supposed to be part of the essential job duties. And so it really is a system. You don't need me saying this, you know this, that an organization is a system. And while I focus on selection, we have to at least think about how all these parts interact. And maybe you're not training for soft skills in organization, but maybe you know through teamwork and through the processes that, you know, you can't help but engage in support of your team members, and time management is essential, and people show empathy and they communicate clearly, those kinds of things. And I guess the point is, a knee-jerk response would be just to do testing, but if you're taking a breath before you do testing, what we call job analysis is really helpful to try and get at those soft skill components you may not have gotten to before when you define the job. So for example, community policing involves interaction with the neighborhood, right? It's not just technical about how to do stops or write tickets, right? It's about integrating with the community and listening and de-escalating conflict and things like that. So job analysis provides a useful framework to then, once you have the ingredients essentially of the job, you get to relook at your job, and that can be a very valuable exercise. You can then think about whether to test or to train or both. How to do recruiting. Your recruiting might be different once you have a mind for soft skills before you ever do any selection. And that's where the clearinghouse idea might come in. So I'll stop there.
And that's going to, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No,
Keep it quick.
I was gonna say, I think you'll also see within companies, you'll see people who are better leaders and developing their employees. And when you start doing 360-degree reviews, you can identify those people, and those people would be ideal to help you further develop soft skills within a company and recognize what you're looking for in employees.
So Mandy, Fred, Greg, thank you very much for the time you spent today sharing your insights. I really appreciate it. And I want to kind of tag quickly onto what Fred was talking about, which is many of the folks on today's webinar are folks that are trying to train individuals to get into the workforce system. And I want to take kind of what Fred was saying. By looking at the job description, you could probably begin to understand what would be the skills that are necessary, particularly the soft and potentially cognitive skills that you would want to see in someone to get that role, not just the technical piece. So kind of this job analysis can work on both the employer side, but also on the education or service provider side as they think about that. So as our audience will see on their screens, we've listed some important resources we have discussed today. First, there's principles, and second, there are links for information about Professor Oswald's work, RED+BLACK, Fast Forward, and UpSkill Houston, and RED+BLACK soft skills video series. And I really want to thank you all today. We'll be having another forum in the next couple of weeks. We'll get that information out there. Probably later today, we'll send you an email that has a link to the actual recording of this, and then we'll have a survey on that. So we would appreciate hearing from you in terms of speakers or other subjects that we would want to address. We'll also be doing an executive summary, which we'll get out later as well, that will summarize this and try to answer some of the questions we didn't get answered today. So thank you very much for participating, and we look forward to seeing you in our next series. Thank you.